After many weeks of controversy, governors of the 36 states of Nigeria and the Presidential Tax Reform Committee on Thursday agreed on modalities for sharing the value-added tax. The governors at the end of their meeting endorsed the sharing of the VAT proceeds on the basis of 50% equality, unchanged from what is currently in operation, 30% derivation from 20% currently in operation, and 60% that was proposed by the Presidential Tax Reform Committee. The governors also agreed on 20% sharing on population basis from 30%, which is the current allocation before the reform of tax administration was proposed. The tax reform deal came as the Senate on Thursday projected a 100 trillion naira aggregate expenditure for the 2026 fiscal year and vowed to free funds it said were being held by some government organizations. Well, Chukwuemeka is a lawyer and lead legal advisor to Chartered Institute of Taxation. He joins us now to take a look at the position of the governors on tax reform bills, VAT distribution, as well as the need to intensify efforts to get the buy-in of all critical stakeholders for the tax reform bills. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.
Good afternoon, Temitope.
So let's start, with your opinion on the governor's position on the tax reform bills and their proposed VAT sharing formula. What are your thoughts on this?
The Chartered Institute of Taxation, of which I represent, is comfortable with the political resolution between the Nigeria Governors Forum and the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. It's a win-win because it has put to rest the various debates over the matter, some of which were taking different slants that we were not comfortable with. So we are comfortable that this is a resolution. As an institute, we don't delve into politics, but we felt all the stakeholders should come to a position. And now that the 36 governors have spoken with the Presidential Committee, I think the National Assembly will not have any issue trying to pull through the tax reform bills. So I think we are good to go.
But in the meantime, what measures would you suggest can be taken to get a general consensus on how to reform Nigeria's tax and fiscal regimes, considering the controversy that this has caused?
You recall that there are many provisions in the 4 tax reform bills, but the heat was on the VAT distribution as contained in Section 77 of the Nigeria Tax Administration Bill. So, and you are aware that by virtue of Section 22, subsection 12 of the same bill, there is provision for attribution, but the real challenge was the amendment of a supposed proposition that derivation should take 60% instead of the previous 20%. Now, that's purely a political issue in terms of percentage. As professionals, we are interested in actually, and it's a horizontal distribution. The vertical distribution, nobody bothered about it. For the federal government to move from 15% to 10%, and the 5% deducted from the federal government allocation to go to the states to move theirs from 50 to 55%, and that of local government state put at 35%. That's the vertical distribution. Nobody has issue with that. The Institute does not also have issue with that. But with respect to the horizontal allocation, it is supported by Section 163 of the Constitution. And, but the percentages are not in the Constitution. But derivation is supported. So the percentage allocation is a political issue. And the 36 governors that represent all the states provided for in the first part 1 of the first schedule to the Constitution, when they have spoken, the people have spoken because they held a meeting with the Presidential Committee. So it is not the governors alone that spoke. The Presidential Committee has also spoken. So it's an agreement, and the National Assembly, represented by Nigerians also, they have heard them loud and clear. And I think definitely they will go in that direction. I think the matter is resolved in all respects. And as we speak today, nobody is saying derivation is not part of it. Derivation is part of it. But the only issue, even the issue of NIDA, third fund, and the other. So all of them have been resolved. ASU, that has been threatening, opposing the tax reform bill because third fund has a terminal date. So now that has been resolved, I think ASU will back down. So the other stakeholders being talked about, they can be subsumed within the states as represented by governors. And as I'm here representing the tax professional body in Nigeria, the Presidential Committee has spoken, the federal government has been represented by the committee. So the remaining stakeholders will fall in line, knowing that Vox Populi, Vox Dei, the people have spoken, and the voice of the people is the voice of God. So the National Assembly will play the script of all these stakeholders because they that are there are representing their states, they are representing their constituencies, and we are members of their constituencies.
All right, sir. What do you make of the continued exemption of essential goods and agricultural produce from VAT?
It is part of international best practice to exempt agricultural produce. It's not just Nigeria. Usually, every society, you have the vulnerable ones. And again, you have a sector that you think that most people patronize. Food security requires that agri should be exempted because when people eat, they can embark on other things. So some people, even in life, it is just food they eat and do a few other things associated with food. So basic foods ought to be exempted. It's not just a Nigerian thing. It is a thing that is applied in many other societies. So we are in support of the continued exemption of agricultural basic foods. Everything involving food, health, education, all of them ought to be exempted because they form the substrata, or each of them form the substratum upon which the vulnerable exists. No society oppresses law in such a way that we make it very difficult to the weakest to survive. So the low-hanging fruits have been exempted. That's food. Everybody has something to do with food. They have been exempted. Every person has something to do with health. So that has been exempted. So I think the Institute supports such a position. And it is not just a Nigerian thing. It is a global phenomenon.
Now, some analysts say the federal government should be more concerned about blocking revenue leakages instead of the controversial tax reforms. I'm just wondering what your thoughts or what your institute's position is on this matter. And talking about revenue leakages, how can such loopholes be plugged?
I think the tax reform bills in Section 69 of the Nigeria Revenue Service Establishment Bill has taken care of using technology to improve all forms of tax administration in this country. Even the Joint Revenue Board of Nigeria in its establishment bill, once it gets that statutory teeth that it is looking for, it will be in a position to operate a technological system that will ensure that every taxpayer who has obtained the tax ID card will certainly fall in line in terms of blocking of leakages, because it's a technology thing. Once you have your tax ID card, I think the federal government is looking at it that all purchases, wherever, they will have the software to do tracking. So data mining, the kind of data mining that will be done in the new regime of taxation will take a different turn, such that almost all your purchases through any electronic means will be captured. And the banks will have sanctions against them if they fail to supply relevant information. They have sanctions payable by them on a quarterly basis. If they fail, and even if anybody has an account in a bank up to 20 million, definitely you will be reported to the tax authorities. Perhaps this one is not just the ordinary tax payment. You might be placed in a place to be regarded as a high net worth individual. And certainly some considerations beyond the normal might be given to you as a high net worth individual. Perhaps issues of auditing and other respects of taxation. So basically, it will be difficult, but not impossible, to continue with tax evasion. So there will be more blockage of tax leakages. And people, I think, have been undergoing training in the tax administrative authorities. By the time the bills are passed, one will see that there will be a revolution in the tax collection mechanism, including blockage of leakages in the tax system.
All right, what do you make of this particular position of the federal government to repeal the law establishing the FIRS, talking about the Federal Inland Revenue Service, and replacing it with the Nigerian Revenue Service?
Yes, there is nothing wrong with that. You remember Ghana has Ghana Revenue Authority, South Africa has South Africa Revenue Service. So it is not new. The UK have His Majesty Revenue and Customs. So there's nothing spectacular except change of name, but the functions will be modified a bit because we've been having this problem. It's not just for FIRS, but FIRS, the National Revenue Authority. So we are using FIRS as a benchmark. There is this situation which is part of global best practice that once you have a revenue authority, all revenues collectible within the system should reflect on their electronic dashboard. But in Nigeria, because in some countries, both the customs and the other stream of revenue, non-custom revenue, fall within the same authority. That's the position in Ghana, that's the position in UK. So a situation that in Nigeria, we are not even talking of customs. The other revenue generating agencies, ASAT, is secular, published by the federal government in December 2023. We had about 68 revenue collection agencies that constitute government-owned enterprises or revenue agencies that are not within the FIRS fold. I think FIRS is one of them. But many of these ones, when they collect revenues, FIRS will not even know. But FIRS, when it gets outside the country, it will be expected to be reporting on revenues collected by all these agencies, because international best practice requires that when they want to make inquiries on revenue, they should just get straight to FIRS, except they want to deal with the Ministry of Finance. So many times FIRS don't have, or it's not wired or connected to these revenue agencies. And the laws establishing these revenue agencies has made them so independent that they are not connected and they have no business connecting with FIRS. So FIRS will go outside the country and be reporting on revenues concerning the country without having the total template, a total picture. So I think with the Nigerian Revenue Service, there will be a situation, a scenario where these revenue collection agencies will have something to do with FIRS. And the government can just say, okay, let's look at FIRS dashboard. and they can have idea as to the revenue situation. Instead of going to all these revenue agencies one by one, revenue collection agencies, they are not really revenue agencies, but they have business with collection of revenue. So it is revenue collection agencies. So a situation government will be visiting their dashboard one by one and visit 68 before it will know the situation. I know that the Federal Ministry of Finance overlooks all of them, but that Federal Ministry of Finance is a different ballgame. It's the ministry. But FIRS should be able to say, okay, you deal with revenue. Let's get to know what you are doing. It will also help in avoiding all this multiplicity of taxes, because many revenue collection agencies, they provide for tax provision. They don't call it tax, they call it revenue yielding provisions in their laws, and get straight to the National Assembly and get it passed. So you discover a situation where many federal government agencies covered by acts of the National Assembly have provisions whereby they collect revenue. And people will be shouting that, oh, multiplicity of taxes, we pay tax to this agency, we pay tax to this agency. With the National Revenue Service now, we have a synergy whereby one can say, okay, why are you collecting what the other ones are collecting? Let's streamline it. So that will be the advantage having this National Revenue Service establishment bill passed by the National Assembly. They'll be in a stronger position to connect with all other revenue collecting agencies beyond their traditional role as the National Revenue Authority, covering all taxes and levies collectible by the major ones
Very
that
well
are collectible by the federal government from its citizens. All right.
Well, thank you so much, Barrister Chukwuemeka Eze, Lead Legal Advisor, CITN. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.